Okay, so I have the pleasure today of being with Mr. Joe Bryan. Joe created a recent video that's gone viral. It's called What's the Problem? As soon as I watched it, I was like, I have to have this guy on. Joe, you summarized the problem better than anyone I've ever seen and packaged it up in this beautifully edited video that I can send friends and family to get them to the starting line. Because as you said in the video, like you can't understand the solution until you understand the problem. And so you beautifully define the problem. So pleasure to have you on, Joe. Where are you right now and where are you from?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on, Anthony. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to Canadians. I'm not from Canada, as you can tell. I'm from Yorkshire in the UK, but I live just outside of London now with my family.
Okay, cool. And what do you want to give us a quick description of the video? We're going to link to it and we're going to share the video in an email to our list, I believe. So sure. Do you just want to describe what the video is?
Yeah, so what the video is a Bitcoin video without being a Bitcoin video. It mentions Bitcoin only at the end. And yes. I would encourage everybody to watch it. It is intended for anybody to be able to watch, whether they're a child or whether they're a pensioner with no financial knowledge or experience, just some life experience. As long as you're a human being with some life experience, you'll be able to follow it. But it takes the viewer on a journey to understand where all the issues they see in their lives today really stem from. And we see a lot of issues around us today, whether it be inequality or obesity or homelessness or political division, extremism, all of these things. But all of these are downstream effects of the money printer. They're just 2 or 3 steps removed from the money printer. And so the video starts from zero and within just over half an hour takes you on a story, a nice soft Pixar animated type story, of 2 sides of an island where they adopt different systems and then one of them spirals out of control. And it spirals out of control because the money is compromised. On one side, you've got the perfect money that can't be changed. And on the other side, you have perfect money that can be changed. Of course, it never will, but somebody eventually succumbs to the temptation of pressing the big red button, which is exactly what governments around the world do. And then you have a spiraling of consequences. And we end up in a world that just looks like today. It just looks like today. And you start to understand then how we've ended up in the position that we are in the world, in every country in the world today, and how it could have been different and how it still can be different. We just have to fix the money. Because if we fix the money, we'll fix the world. And by watching it, hopefully it gets you to the starting line with Bitcoin. You now understand the problem that Bitcoin solves. And you're motivated then to read a book about Bitcoin or watch a video about Bitcoin. You also have a skeletal mental framework for understanding some of the things about Bitcoin through the video. But it's through story, it's not a lecture. And so it seems to be very, very effective. I didn't, as I said to you off camera, I didn't really expect the level of success or virality that the videos had. I just hoped a few people would watch it, and within a week of launching it, it's getting shared on X by Michael Saylor, who most of your viewers wouldn't know who that is, but he's the chairman of what's recently been rebranded as Strategy, which is the biggest Bitcoin company in the world. He shared it with 4 million people on X. And I'd only had a few hundred followers before that. I'd had a brand new YouTube account with no followers. And now it's been viewed millions of times on X and 150,000 odd in YouTube. And so, yeah, it seems to be striking a chord with a lot of people. And I've had hundreds of emails and messages from people all around the world, Bitcoiners and non-Bitcoiners, basically saying this basically distills everything they have in their head in a way that they haven't been able to articulate before, but also from people who didn't realize these issues stemmed from the money printer and now realize that they have a greater level of understanding and control in their own life because they can identify where these things have actually come from. And if you identify where these things come from, you can then start to make decisions in your personal life to take back that control and to insulate yourselves from those issues or from the causes of those issues. Anyway, very long answer to your question.
No, it's great. So I first came across the video when Michael Saylor retweeted it. And if Saylor is going to put his stamp of approval on an educational piece, it's a big deal to me because I know how much content and how deeply that guy understands Bitcoin and how much content he absorbs himself. And so when he put his stamp of approval, that's an instant watch for me. And as soon as I watched it, I thought, oh my God, I've been talking about Bitcoin wrong this whole time, because how is anybody supposed to understand or respect how elegant of a solution that Bitcoin can be if they don't even understand the problem that it's solving? And the further you go down that Bitcoin rabbit hole, the deeper you understand that problem that it solves, and you start to piece all these puzzle pieces together and how it fixes things. But it takes a while to get there, and it takes a lot of time and energy and focus to get there. And your video is so beautiful because it condenses all of that into a half-hour, beautifully edited, illustrated video that defines the problem in the first place. And you're right, it gets people to the starting line. And when I first started learning about Bitcoin, just from Tom in our office, we would talk about it at length, and he would describe some of the problems that it fixes, things like our healthcare system, things like obesity and chronic disease, things like, just general economic ailments, the wealth gap, the monetization of basic needs like housing, so many different things. And I would be like, yeah, okay, I can connect the dots, but is it too simple to say Bitcoin fixes all of this? Like, there's a lot of problems in the world, endless, infinite amount of problems that we as humanity need to solve. Does Bitcoin and bad money really cause all of these things? And I didn't really buy it at first. I'm like, it's too simple of a solution. It's too simple. I'm like, there's no way. The world is too complex. The economy is too complex. There's all sorts of things, broken media, where we're being lied to all the time. There's just so much wrong.
Yeah.
Could it really just be the money? And I didn't believe it. But the further I've gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I'm like, oh my God, Bitcoin is a potential solution to solve at least half of the world's problems. And when a technology comes along that can solve half the world's problems, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I would say I'd go further and say it solves most of the world's problems to an acceptable degree. Mm-hmm. To think we'll ever live in a world where no one's obese is unrealistic, right? Where there's no wealth gap at all, unrealistic. Where there's no homelessness, unrealistic. Right? But when you have broken money, it puts all of these problems on steroids and accentuates them all. Like, we are human beings, we are fragile, frail, imperfect. We will create problems ourselves.
Yes.
Right. But you want a monetary system that doesn't accentuate them all. You want a monetary system that has a positive downstream effect on decision making for the population, regardless of the topic. And when you have more structure, more stable foundations, you can plan more for the future. You start to make better decisions. If you feel like you have no foundations, if you feel like you have no future, you feel like you're constantly struggling, you're under pressure, you're stressed, you're worried, then it compromises all your other things. It compromises your health, it compromises your physical and mental health, it compromises your short and long-term decision making, your priorities. It just infects absolutely everything. And so, Bitcoin goes a long way to fix the very observable things the very observable problems. But it has this sort of second layer impact, I think, on you as an individual, which then has knock-on effects about the way other things improve in your life. So, it explicitly solves the majority, or goes a long way to solving the majority, but implicitly goes a long way to solving the rest because it's an upgrade to use the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. So I said 50% because I want to be conservative. I'm like, I know it's at least 50. And I think it's more than 50. But I know it's somewhere between 50 and 100% of humanity's problems get solved with this thing. And I think you're right. I think it's majority. And that's a big friggin' deal. But you got to understand what the problem is in the first place. And so what are some of the problems that broken money system that we currently have today causes? And our audience is familiar with a lot of this stuff. We talk about it, but could you just summarize some of the issues that have arisen today that can be directly tied to the money printer?
Yeah, so maybe we start with what are the direct consequences of printing money?
Yes, please.
Right, and there's really 3 direct consequences, which leads to a bunch of other things. And the first is a distortion of price signals. Now, this may be like sort of a fairly abstract concept for people, but when we go about our daily lives, as individuals and as businesses, we are constantly making economic calculations whenever we spend any money. We say, this is the cost of something, this is how much I will have to pay for it, and this is the cost of my money, this is the opportunity cost I have of not, if I don't buy that, I can buy something else in the future. Now, when you have a money where you cannot rely on the stability of the money or the future purchasing power of the money, you don't understand what the value of the money is. And therefore your decision making around spending money on anything is starting from shaky foundations, because you start to prioritize shorter term spending at the expense of saving it, because you can't rely on the value of it being the same in a year's time. But on the flip side, the cost of anything is also distorted, because when the government prints money, that money effectively goes into the accounts of the government. And I'm simplifying this massively. Obviously it's more complicated than this, but to make it accessible, to simplify as much as possible. That money goes into the account of the government. The government then put that money to work in the economy. Now they do that via people who are connected directly or indirectly to the government. So there's certain sectors and certain people in the economy that get the money first. And that looks like increased demand for those areas of the economy. Now, if you had a perfectly free market, the only reason prices would change is if there's a change in price, in supply or demand for a given thing. Whereas if I create extra money and I give it to someone and allow them to go and spend it on something, that looks like demand. So the price goes up. But it's not real demand, it's just extra money that didn't exist before. But in a market, that's a signal to entrepreneurs who are constantly looking for economic opportunities. Say, okay, prices have gone up in this area, but the cost of supplying those things in those areas hasn't gone up. So there's now an extra profit margin I can go and try and compete for, right? So you see areas that the government spend this extra printed money as attracting entrepreneurs and free capital within the market as they're reacting to price signals, which then takes entrepreneurs and free capital away from more productive parts of the economy because they're being attracted to something that's distorted. It's not real. It's not real demand. Right? And so you end up with this capital misallocation. So it undermines the quality of an economy. Everyone, the more and more you do this, the more and more the most productive people, the most mobile people in the economy get sucked closer and closer to the government, trying to monetize this printed money rather than real productivity gains, which are driven from real supply and demand. So that's the first one. This is price signals. And price signals destroy everything, right? This is like, you go down that route, eventually you end up in communism where there are no price signals because the government sets all the prices. And then, this is a disaster, right? But it's the first step to undermine the free market. That's the first thing. The second thing is that as more money enters the economy, prices, input costs start to increase for businesses. So every business is now faced with a choice of how to protect their existing profit margins. And businesses are not there to maximize short-term profits. Most businesses aren't. Most businesses are there to maximize long-term value. Right? This is why you have, you invest in your business, you nurture relationships, you want to grow and be there in 10 years' time, 50 years' time, 100 years' time. But when your input costs start increasing, your profit margins get eroded. But the input costs are increasing because the money's being printed. And so what happens is your margins go down. You're now faced with a choice like, I need to make a certain amount of profit to justify me spending time on this business, justify me taking the risk of being a capital allocator, employing all these people, putting this capital to work. Otherwise, I just close down the business and go do something else. And now, you really only have three choices. The first is, well, I'll just pass on the price increase to the customer. And I'll keep the product the same. Let's imagine it's a physical product. I'll keep the product the same size, the same quality. I'll just increase the price. But now the customer has to pay more for the same thing they paid less for yesterday. That's one way. The second is you say, well, I'm going to keep the price the same. I'm just going to shrink the product. And we see this. We see this all around us, right? It used to be 100 grams and now it's 90 grams. But it's the same price. Same quality, same price, just smaller.
Yeah, you see that with toilet paper, paper towel,
or you see
chips.
Everything. I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday, and my daughter, who's 13, she was like, I'm sure this butter used to be 250 grams. Now 200 grams. It doesn't have the right ingredients for the cake.
Yeah.
I need to go and buy another block of butter. But this is what happens. By making those changes, you are reducing the affordability of the population. They either have to spend more for the same thing, or they spend the same and get less, which means if they needed that original amount, they just got to go and buy more of it. So you're reducing the affordability. Or the third one, and this is trying to insulate the consumer from those price changes, is to try and find a way to reduce your input costs again. So some input costs have gone up. I now need to reduce the input cost again to be able to keep the product the same size and the same price. And I can do that through one of two ways. The easiest way is just to fire people. Right? I'm just going to run even leaner operations, compromise on customer service, whatever, just to cut my costs back. So you lead to increasing unemployment, and now the government has to step in. Because they've printed this money, they've now got more unemployed people they need to try and figure out how to support. Or they don't fire people and they just reduce the quality. And so you end up with the same product, same size, just worse quality. And we see this in our food. We see this in our food all the time, right? You have fresh produce replaced with increasing levels of industrialized sludge. And then that goes and causes a health crisis. So ever reducing standards of food across the industry, more industrialization, greater levels of obesity and other knock-on impacts. And now, you've got a health crisis that the government now needs to step in and try and solve the healthcare system as well. And, so those are the first two. And the third one which is the one that I think impacts, your area more than any other, and that's asset prices go up. You have asset inflation. Because they've printed this money, there are now more, in the video it's fiatellos. He prints fiatellos, it's like the currency. There's more fiatellos washing around in the system. So if you owned a house and you knew someone was printing fiatellos, you'd put the price of the house up for sale. Right? Because there's just more fiatellos washing around in the system. Like, why would you sell it the same that you sold it for yesterday? it's like playing Monopoly. It's like playing a game of Monopoly, which I presume is the thing also in Canada as it is in the UK, right? The board game. And then the banker just can take as much money as he wants out of the box and just leave it on the edge of the table. It's not even in the game, it's just on the edge of the table, right? But he can take it and put it in the game whenever he wants. It's like, what do people do about the prices they're willing to sell houses to each other at? Go up. They're not any richer, they haven't got any more money, but there's more money in the game, right? So the prices start going up. And this is exactly what happens when you hit the big red button. This money goes into the economy, and ultimately it finds its way into asset prices. And it's mainly housing, it's the stock market, it's speculative assets. And then what happens is people start to become accustomed to just assets constantly going up. And it's like, well, assets are going up all the time. Like, why would I just keep my cash in the bank? Not only if I keep my cash in the bank, it's losing its purchasing power, right? Because every year life is becoming more unaffordable because the prices go up or the shrinkflation or the quality goes down. I have to now speculate with it to try and recover that purchasing power. But because asset prices always go up, that's great, I'll just buy a second home or I'll buy the stock market. Because they keep going up, I should just borrow to do this as well. I should take out another mortgage and another mortgage and another mortgage and I'll just buy more houses because they go up. And so inevitably you end up with more leverage in the system because it's the logical thing to do. And because you have more leverage in the system, you have more fragility in the banking system. Everyone is more leveraged, individuals are more leveraged, companies are more leveraged, countries are more leveraged. Right. And then I could carry on here and go through a ton more of the second and third order implications, Anthony, if that's what you'd like me to do. I'm conscious I've just been talking for a while.
No, Joe, I love it. Please go on. Like, you're beautifully describing the problem in such a systematic, logical, clear-headed, common sense way. So please just continue what you're doing.
I'll continue then. And so what happens then as asset prices are going up and people are struggling with day-to-day living costs because the prices in the shops are going up? If you're trying to buy a house, you're trying to live a normal life, it's very hard to afford to live and afford to live somewhere. You need to buy a house, but the house prices have now all gone up. And so to be able to buy a house, you've got to take out a bigger mortgage. And the only way you can afford to take out a bigger mortgage is if both of you are working. Trying to buy a house on a single salary becomes almost impossible. I mean, Canada feels this more than probably any other country in the world. We all suffer from it, but you guys are, it's a lot more extreme there in certainly in some cities. But you can't buy it on one salary, normal salary. So you need both parents working. And so if both parents are working in the family, you have more stress, less time together. At the same time as you're struggling to afford day-to-day life, it means you can have fewer children. You can't afford to have as many children as you would have had before because you spend less time with them and there's less money to go around. And even if you wanted to stay at home and work and look after the children, it means you can't afford the mortgage. But going to work for the mortgage also means that you'd have to pay childcare costs. So what's the outcome? You just have fewer children. You just can't afford it. And so you start to see we start to understand why we see a demographic shift. Like, we have fewer and fewer children being born and people are living longer, right? And so now it's very clear why our national debt becomes unsustainable. It's because, we've come through this period of growth where we've had low debt burdens. We've made promises to people about the amount of time they have to work before they can retire. And what will happen when they retire is they'll we've gone from defined benefit. It's like, you'll have a really good quality of life in your retirement. And then over the last 20 or 30 years, we've constantly eroded that to the point where now, you're getting small amounts in your retirement as some state pensions. I'm speaking in a general way because it might not apply necessarily to Canada versus the UK, whatever. But your state pension is effectively locked in and goes up a small amount by inflation, but that's less than the rate at which they're printing money. So it's being eroded in value in real terms. And the time at which you can retire, the age, just constantly gets pushed back and back and back. And I doubt we will ever be able to retire because they can't balance it. The obligations they've committed to in the past are too big relative to the amount of debt that we have and the demographics that we have coming through. There are fewer children being born. And there are fewer children being born, which means that populations are starting to decline. So you have a population starting to decline and you have a massive debt burden. How do you support that? Especially when half your population ends up being retired in 20 years. You can't support that. So you've got to find ways to erode the value of it, to undermine the value of it. And, for the people who can't afford to buy houses, the people who are, stuck renting. So maybe earlier in their life journey, or not advanced enough in their salary income to be able to ever afford to consider buying a house, then you still feel these effects because the house prices go up, the rent has to go up because the landlords need a yield on their assets, right? And so if the rent starts going up every year or every couple of years, it becomes very hard to plan long term. Because whereas, before you might have said, I can rent the same place for 5 years, we'll have some children, we'll get settled, and then we'll think about buying a house, hopefully. You can't do that anymore because you can't even be sure you'll be in the same place next year. You wait until that letter arrives from the landlord to finally put it up 15%, and then you have to go and move somewhere else. So people end up making shorter and shorter term decisions. They put off getting married, put off having children again. And then, the more the rents go up, the more they realize they're never going to be able to afford to buy a house. So what do you do? Well, if there's no point saving for anything, then I'll just live my best life. I'll live my best life, which still starts to come into like modern parlance where people start to celebrate those things as opposed to realizing what they are. And realizing what they are is a negative consequence of the corruption of the money. And people should be angry about not being able to afford the house rather than celebrating. Life affirming, I'm going to just go on holiday and not have children and enjoy myself. And then, thinking just becomes much more short term for everything. And, there's some people who are on the really tricky end of that where they can't afford to go on holiday. They can't afford to live their best life. They're just trying to survive. Right? They're just trying to survive, and every year that passes, it's just harder. It's just harder because maybe their income is largely fixed. They're on a per hour worker. Having to juggle multiple jobs. The cost of living is outstripping their increase in wages. The cost of renting somewhere is outstripping their increase in wages. It's like every year is harder. What do you do? At some point, you just give up.
Hey, it's Anthony Molinaro from the Your Life, Your Term show, and I've got some exciting news. On Saturday, April 12th, we're hosting our biggest and most in-depth Your Life, Your Terms event yet in Mississauga, Ontario, and space is filling up fast. This is your chance to join us for a transformational day packed with powerful insights, strategies, and connections to help you live life on your terms. We'll be covering the biggest real estate opportunities, what's happening with the Canadian and global economy, how to protect and grow your wealth with Bitcoin and hard assets, assets, and how to use marketing strategies and disruptive technologies to build freedom and income for yourself. But here's the deal. Tickets are going up the closer we get to the event, and with the early flood of registrations, we'll likely be hitting capacity. If you want to guarantee your seat and save some money, register now before it's too late. And remember, if you're a Rockstar Inner Circle member, your tickets are completely free for yourself and your guests. Head over to yourlifeyourtermsevent.com and secure your spot today. You don't want to miss this one. That's yourlifeyourtermsevent.com.
You just give up. And then it's, addiction, it's, poor life choices, it's risk taking, it's, bad stuff. And, all of these things put more and more pressure on the government. It's just a long list of things the government then need to try and solve, whether it's increased homelessness or addiction, the health crisis, the pensions crisis, the erosion of the tax base because, the young people coming through haven't got well-paying jobs because the people above them haven't retired, so there's no way for them to grow. It ends up being a stack of issues that the government creates just from pressing the button. Right? If it's all these downstream things that people just don't, it's very hard to connect them back to what actually caused them. And, what happens is the government introduces these issues, has to try and step in and solve them. By doing so, it has to print more money or misallocate more money back into the economy to try and deal with these things, further distorting the price signals. And then what happens is, either the misallocation of capital or the instability that's been introduced in the banking system causes a problem. Asset prices start to fall, the banks start calling the government saying, hang on, we're over leveraged here, we're going to go bust unless you help us out, and the depositors are going to lose their money. Then what happens is the government has to print more money to bail them out. So it bails out the banks, it makes the problem worse for everyone else. And you just end up in the cycle. The only solution is just to print more money. And this is why we see asset prices just continue to go up. It's because they can't allow them not to go up. Because if they allow them not to go up, the whole system collapses. And they can't allow that. And then once the government gets in this aggressive cycle of money printing, it just centralizes absolutely everything. You get the pharmaceutical industry, the defense sector, the Wall Street, and a few others become like parasitic attachments to the government. And then it's very unclear to everybody in the population, like, where does the government end and these things begin? Like, it's really unclear, right? Mm-hmm. And they're effectively just attached to the money printer.
Yeah.
Right, at the expense of everybody else. And, you end up with the media getting captured in that as well. Because the media is funded by big advertisers who tend to be connected to the money printer. Those same industries put a lot of advertising dollars into the media companies, and the government is also increasingly shaky in terms of its own credibility because it's becoming protective of these industries over the population. Right? Because if the industries are not aligned with the government, the secondary and tertiary issues that have been created are going to cause issues for the population, then issues for the government. So the government needs to be much more rigid in how it controls information within the economy, especially with regards to the parasitic industries attached to it. So it starts to initially softly guide the media as to what is the right thing to say and what's not the right thing to say. Starting to label stuff as misinformation or disinformation. Basically, anyone who has an opinion that is not the same as the government is promoting misinformation. Right? Mm. This is all very familiar. To us. Right? And it is just the undermining of the independence of the media by the government, because they can't allow free speech anymore. They can't allow active discussion or alternative opinions. Mm. And when stuff happens, they just hit the big red button again, they print more money, or they undermine the sovereignty of the money.
Because if they allowed free speech, then it would cause the collapse of the whole thing if the truth got out.
Yeah, because you don't, when you have a system built on debt, and that can only survive with the creation of more debt, having people realize that is the system is a problem. It's much less of a problem if everyone's trapped inside the system and can't do anything about it. It becomes a massive problem when there's an escape hatch. Right? If you're trapped in that, if you're trapped using a currency and everything is measured in that currency, and there is nothing to hold other than stuff bought within the country, then you're at the mercy of the government. Right? You take your Canadian moose shekels, as I've heard them termed, right? And you go and buy some Canadian property, right? That's still in Canada. That goes up in value. At some point in time, the Canadian government goes, "Oh, I don't like the look of this deficit we've got and the amount of debt we've got. We need to bail the population in." Right, but we can't tell them we're bailing them in. So what we're going to do? Well, we're going to increase property taxes. That thing that you bought, that you already own, you're going to pay again for it. You're going to increase the property taxes, and we're going to increase it even more for the more expensive properties. And we're going to label the more expensive properties in Canadian moose shekel terms. So the more moose shekels we print, the more properties are caught in that higher rate of tax, and therefore the more tax people pay us. And we're going to carry on doing that. Oh, and also, that's not going to work in the long run. So what we're going to do, we're going to make them even higher. And maybe we even reach a point where there's a systematic issue. We need to bail in everybody. And if you own 3 properties, one of them now belongs to the government. I'm making it up as a particular example. Right? Anyone who owns more than 2 properties hands them over to the government, because it's you've done well out of the system. Right? You have no choice. You have no choice because it's in Canada. No choice. They're going to take it. Right? You can fight them in the courts, but they'll just take it. You can't fight it because it's inside the system. It's the same with when you have the money in your bank accounts. If you're a truck driver, a Canadian truck driver, you learn the lesson the hard way, right? If it's in the system, it's not yours. It's not yours, and so you can control it. When you have a leak in the system, that's when the issue arises, and the leak in the system is Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin exists outside the system, nobody can print it. And if no one can print it, then it becomes an amazing economic battery for you. Because as soon as I am outside the system, all the system's problems become my asset, not my liability. Inside the system, the more money they print, the more it's my problem. Because the 99% of people lose inside the system. Even the wealthy lose inside the system. And many of your customers, many of your viewers will probably resonate with their wealth on a piece of paper carries on going up, but they don't feel any wealthier. Right? It's because the rate at which money is being printed is greater than the rate at which the number is going up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you think you're getting wealthier, but your share of the pie is declining. Not because there's been growth, but because someone's stealing it. Because they're printing for free what you have to work for. Right? And so you, in the long run, the money printer is your liability. Take that to its natural conclusion. They print as many moose shekels as they want, And eventually the purchasing power of a moose shekel is zero. It's tending towards zero, which means your share of the pie is tending towards zero. So it's your liability when you're in the system. When you're outside the system, if you're saving in Bitcoin, the big red button becomes, it's no longer your liability. The more they print, the more of an asset that is to you. Because they're just diluting everything inside the system. But they can't affect the amount of Bitcoin that you own. And this is why this is why frame of reference is so important. So for most of us, we still think in fiat terms, like you measure in moose shekels or in fiat dollars. But when you stop thinking about moose shekels and you measure stuff in Bitcoin, you actually see what's happening. So if you think about house prices in Canada, it looks like an insane exponential chart when measured in moose shekels, but they're falling in Bitcoin terms. They're losing money.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you're measuring it in the wrong thing. Like when you start thinking about Bitcoin, and if your measurement becomes in Bitcoin, you realize that holding anything other than Bitcoin is an inefficient battery of economic storage. Because what's happening is we're working in moose shekels. Realize we can't put those moose shekels in the bank, right? Because they're just going to decline in value. They're going to buy. We all know. We all implicitly know. This is not a controversial. There won't be a controversial statement to anyone listening. Is that you can't have the same. You can't rely on the purchasing power next year for that money. You can't. It's going down in value. Now, if you left it in the bank for 10 years, it probably loses half its value. 30 years, 90% of its value. Which means you've got a really inefficient battery.
Yeah.
The battery depletes its half-life every 10 years. Like when you work, you are expending your economic energy in exchange for something. That something should retain that economic energy. If you lose half of it every 10 years, that's terrible. Right? And what that forces you to do is it forces you to spend it or risk it in an attempt to try and restore the battery to 100%, right? Which is just totally the wrong mindset. Whereas if you stored your economic energy in Bitcoin, it is the perfect economic energy battery. Because not only does it retain 100% in the long run, obviously, and we'll talk about volatility in a minute because volatility is an aspect, but it's a positive aspect, not a negative aspect of Bitcoin. You retain that economic energy in a form to be used at any point in time. But we're at a stage here where Bitcoin is being monetized at the same time as everything else is being demonetized. And so it becomes an economic battery of growth greater than 100% efficiency, right? Because you benefit from the monetization of this over and above the productivity gains that Bitcoin drives for everybody, which you would see in a free market. And so when you think about your investment choices, you've earned that money, someone else is printing it for free, it's decaying. What do you do? If Bitcoin didn't exist, and it hasn't existed for a long time, right? This is why we have crazy house prices in Canada. You realize, well, I can't put it in the bank and save it. So I need to earn some yield. I can go and buy moose shekel treasuries, but they're still getting printed and the rate is less than inflation, et cetera, and they get destroyed when they change the interest rate policy. Or I can buy a house. I'll earn some yield on the house, but then tax to buy the house, property taxes. You have the rental income, you have the hassle, you have the taxes on the rental income, you have the upkeep. Fewer and fewer things are now tax deductible against that rental income, right? As they erode the ability for you to drive yield outside the taxation, free of taxation. And I benefit from the value increase over time, but it's a lot of hassle and the yield is very low. But the percentage of the pie, of the total wealth pie that house represents, is constantly declining. So it's better than cash, but I'm still losing as a percentage of the pie. And you go, okay, well, what about gold? Gold is a hard asset. I'll just buy gold instead. Okay, I'll buy gold, try and protect my wealth. I'll keep it at home. But then once you acquire a sufficient amount of gold, it becomes a risk to have it at home. It's like I've got all my wealth in this little bar of gold, but somebody breaks in and steals it. So what do you have to do? You have to think about security. Okay, so you're replicating, trying to protect that. When you're not an expert at doing it, where do you stop? You probably come to the conclusion, well, I should get professionals to look after this gold for me. I'll put it in a gold vault with everyone else's gold. You put it in the gold vault, they give you a piece of paper. You don't own gold anymore. You own a piece of paper that says you own some gold. Mm-hmm. Right? And then what happens is the government realizes the financials of the country are unsustainable. So with the stroke of the pen, they're going to nationalize all the gold and they're going to pay you in moose shekels, just like they did in 1933 in the US. Overnight, which most of your viewers probably won't know. No. They made gold illegal for 40 years in America.
Yeah.
It doesn't get talked about from 1930s, 1970. Overnight, they say, right, it's now illegal to hold gold. You have to go and hand it in and you'll get dollars in return. And then they immediately devalue the dollars.
Yeah, because they printed too many.
Exactly. The same thing because they had to recapitalize the system because they printed too many dollars. This is exactly the same what will happen in the future. And so you don't own gold. You own the promise. And to think that the gold vault won't hand over the gold is fanciful. The government turns up, it's now illegal. You've got to hand over the gold, they'll hand it over immediately. This is how it works. So not only do you struggle to protect your wealth, you struggle to even have wealth. It's not really yours. The property is not really yours. It's yours until they say it's not yours. You can't move it. The money in the bank is yours until with their permission. You want to send all your money to someone else across the world, you need the approval of your bank and the government to do that, which means it's not your money. It's not your money. And so if you struggle to store your wealth, protect your wealth, or even classify it as wealth in the first place, you're totally stuffed. You're totally stuffed. But the solution for all of this is Bitcoin. All of it's Bitcoin. No one can stop me sending you $1 billion right now in Bitcoin. I don't have $1 billion, just to be clear, but nobody can stop me, right? And I can send it instantly to you, and you can send it straight back to me, and no one would even know. Right? That is proper wealth. That is proper wealth. I'm independent. I do not require permission to store my economic energy and to do with my economic energy whatever I choose to do with my economic energy.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think you've only asked me 2 questions, and I've been talking for about half an hour. So
I'll give you a slow clap there, Joe. That was beautiful. What a beautiful summary. And it's why I'm such a fan of your video, because you've just condensed it all. You've condensed it. It's so logical. Like, it makes so much sense. I'm going to, go back on what I said. I think it's 99% of the problems in the world now. That's it. Forget the 50%. I'm up at 99%. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're talking about the problems, you get me so fired up. I want to run through a wall and like punch a central banker. But when you talk about the solution, I start to calm down again, Joe, and I get hopeful and optimistic for the future.
You should be optimistic for the future. And I think this is one of the great things about Bitcoin, is that if Bitcoin wasn't here, if Bitcoin didn't exist, we'd be absolutely screwed.
Yes.
We would be screwed. But Bitcoin is the escape hatch for everybody. And it's the unilateral one. Nobody can stop you doing it. They can make it more challenging by making it harder for you to, more layers of permission required for you to get your moose shekels out of the bank account.
Yeah.
But they can't stop you. People will find a way of owning Bitcoin and using Bitcoin. But once you, and I think, we're very much on the same page here, Anthony. I've gone through this journey, is that once the penny starts to drop with Bitcoin, it just changes your entire outlook.
Mm-hmm.
Like you know there's the escape hatch, and you also know that it's entirely logical to arrive at the conclusion that you should be using it.
Yes.
Just as we've talked about, it's entirely logical. And so if it's entirely logical, what's going to happen over time is that everybody realizes it's entirely logical to use the escape hatch. And so everyone uses the escape hatch. And when everyone uses the escape hatch, the old system dies. And the old system dies and they can't do anything about it.
Yeah. Joe, I want to go back to what you said. It was super powerful that when you're in the system, all of the money printing, even if you might temporarily benefit from it, from your asset prices going up, or from the mortgages that you took to buy the properties being debased away by the money printing, you do temporarily benefit from it. But no matter what, you still are trapped within the system. So all the money printing is a liability to you. Can you just further describe why owning Bitcoin and being in this parallel system, all the money printing is an asset? Can you just flesh that idea out further so I can fully understand it?
Yeah, so Bitcoin has a fixed supply of, it's slightly less, but let's call it 21 million.
Yeah.
Fixed supply, 21 million. Each one of those Bitcoin has 100 million Satoshis, in the same way that, one moose shekel is 100 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's fixed supply forever. And so when you think about the entire wealth of the world divided by those 21 million, that's ultimately what Bitcoin represents. Each Bitcoin is 1/21 millionth of the entire wealth of the world. Now, if you measure the entire wealth of the world in moose shekels, and they just print more moose shekels, then each Bitcoin is worth an increasing amount of moose shekels. It still represents the same proportion of the pie, but just the number of moose shekels it represents gets bigger. And what happens? So there's an explicit number of moose shekels for one Bitcoin sort of ratio. So that's an explicit asset benefit, because ultimately, if you ever wanted to go back into the system, it would represent more moose shekels. But it's really a bigger asset because of the impact it has by them printing the moose shekels. It's like once you leave the system, you are removing your contribution to the system, or you're minimizing your contribution to the system. And the more you leave the system, the more they have to print the big red button. The more they have to print because of the value leakage out of the system. And as more people leave the system, they've got to print even faster, to the point where they're just constantly printing, because it's the only way to solve the problem is to just print more money, because the debt's become unsustainable. And And so, in the long run, the natural conclusion for everybody is Bitcoin is the answer. And that applies to the individual, it applies to the companies, but it also applies to countries. So if the people in charge, I know you have a Canadian politician who is pro-Bitcoin, right? And I'm not on top of the political schedule within the US. I don't know when your elections are. But
maybe never, Joe. Maybe never.
Well,
at the rate it's going in Canada. Anyways, I won't go on about that. Please carry on.
Yeah. I'm going to refrain from commenting on any politicians in Canada. But the only way out of the economic debt crisis that every country has is Bitcoin. And when you have access to a big red button, ultimately you're going to hit that big red button and buy Bitcoin. Because why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
So the end game is governments print moose shekels and use the moose shekels to buy Bitcoin. That's the end game.
At which point those moose shekels are not going to hold much value for much longer after that event happens.
No, because it's just an erosion.
Yeah.
It's an erosion. They're already printing them all the time.
Yep.
Already doing issuing debt, printing them. Because you can't default in your own currency. You just print more currency, you debase the currency, so it's default by the back door. The purchasing power of your currency goes to zero.
Yeah, it's hidden default.
Yeah, because no one's going to explicitly default when you can print your own currency. It doesn't happen.
You'll just smoke and mirrors default.
Yeah. And when you do that, asset prices just go up even more. But the most efficient economic battery goes up the most because it acts as the center of gravity for everything. And people go through that logical thinking of, well, I could buy the stock market, but I don't really own the shares. I could buy a house, but I don't really own the house, and then they're going to tax it. I could buy gold, but I don't want it, just a piece of paper saying I have gold. So they ultimately end up buying Bitcoin. And once you go down the rabbit hole of understanding why you own Bitcoin, there's no chance you're ever selling it. There is nothing after that. So it's a one-way stop. It's a one-way train. And it's a one-way train on a journey that everybody's going to make. And if you know where everyone's going to end up, then you just need to be there faster. You don't want to be the last one leaving the station, or else, you're the one who's getting bailed in by the government. This is how it's going to be. And, we have several hundred countries, the majority with their own currency. Many don't. Many are pegged to the dollar or, forced to use something from some other country. But anyone with access to a big red button is going to gradually wake up to the fact that if I have the ability to create something for free and I can buy the only absolutely scarce asset in the entire universe, why would I not be doing that? Especially when I see my next door neighbor doing that, and they're acquiring more Bitcoin than me, and I know they're all the fiat currencies are going to zero. I need to own as much Bitcoin as I can, as quickly as I can. And I this may seem such an absurd or like such a far-fetched idea for the people listening, but if this is going to happen, the only question is the time frame over which this is going to happen. Well,
it's already happening, I would say, and I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, I mean, countries are buying Bitcoin. They are earning Bitcoin. They're mining Bitcoin. We talk about what mining means maybe in a few minutes, or why countries should be doing that, how countries should be doing that. But I think very few countries, if any, are explicitly just printing money, hitting the big red button in the purest possible form just to buy Bitcoin.
You're right. Yeah.
But it's a logical outcome here.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to recapitalize. The first country to do it is going to see the biggest benefit. Because even if you could buy, let's imagine you could increase your national debt by 10% and own, let's say increase your national debt by 10% and buy Bitcoin. If ultimately everybody's going to do that and Bitcoin goes up 10x, you've cleared your national debt.
Oh, sorry. You froze there for a second. Do you mind just saying the last sentence again?
Yeah, no worries. So imagine you increase your national, and this is a very simplified example. If you increase your national debt by 10%. Yeah. And then you buy Bitcoin with that. And let's imagine you don't move the price of Bitcoin. Eventually, when everyone figures out they need to own Bitcoin, and Bitcoin goes up, even if it's just 10x, you've cleared the national debt. You've recapitalized your country.
True.
The first people to do this are going to set themselves up for 1,000 years. This is, or maybe 100 years, but some people are not going to get the benefit of that.
Yeah.
Others will. And it's the first time in history where every individual gets the opportunity to front run governments, the finance institutions. 99% of Wall Street doesn't get this. They still think it's a Ponzi scheme or tulips or whatever.
How do you see this playing out, Joe, for the average Canadian, let's say the average Brit? What's going to happen in their day-to-day lives as the fiat system continues doing what the fiat system must do and must print money? And one by one, we all logically, inevitably end up moving into a new system because it's the logical thing to do as you've laid out. Yeah. What happens? What is this transition like?
I think it's very gradual and then can be quite sharp. But it depends on where you are in the queue to make this change. For the countries that are proactive about this, it can be a very positive thing. Mm-hmm. A very positive thing, because Bitcoin is going to win, and the Bitcoin is going to eat everything anyway, regardless of what politicians do. And so you can either fight it or you can embrace it. And fighting it doesn't give you any positive outcomes. Embracing it gives you massive positive outcomes. So what's inevitably going to happen is that people embrace it. The people who embrace it first get the biggest outcomes. And there's nothing you can do to stop the population engaging with Bitcoin. All you can do as a country is make people make a decision to be non-compliant. Right? They can make it illegal for you to touch Bitcoin in Canada, and then you're just going to make a decision to be non-compliant.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can and will and do make it more difficult and run disinformation campaigns and brainwash you and ban mining, and they can ban exchanges, but inevitably there's still a way.
Yeah, because they know they can't stop it. So the worst thing you can do as a government is create a law you can't enforce, because then you lose legitimacy. You've got to have laws you can actually enforce. So then they're never going to say it's illegal. It would be ludicrous for them to say it's illegal to send it or receive any Bitcoin. Because large portions of people in the population are going to be doing it, and there's no way for you A, to tell, or B, to enforce it. So they just make it harder and harder to engage. But some countries would lean into it or will lean into it and be much more positively engaged. And you're starting to see this in the US. Right? The US are coming out with a constructive framework for thinking about Bitcoin and other crypto assets. But I mean, that's separate. And to everyone at home, if it's not Bitcoin, ignore it, because it's either fraud or speculative technology and in the search for product market fit. It is not Bitcoin. It's not neutral, decentralized, immutable money for the world. But the countries that do embrace it are going to see all the benefits. Ultimately, Bitcoin is going to unlock a level of civilizational change that we've not seen before. And I'm including the internet in that.
Joe, why do you think it's more important than the internet? It's going to be a bigger change than the internet.
Because it changes everything. It changes everything. It changes the way that we think about the world, our decision-making processes. To think about, even just think about your own journey, Anthony. So 2019 Anthony versus 2025 Anthony.
Oh, man.
Right? What's had the bigger impact on you, Bitcoin or the internet?
Bitcoin, although I can directly attribute the internet to learning about Bitcoin.
Fair. But your thought processes and decision making, and the biggest impact to you as an individual in your life.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, hands down is Bitcoin, because it changes your thought process. It changes everything about you.
Yes.
And if it changes you innately, that doesn't stop when you switch this computer off. Right? It's with you on your online, it's with you with your offline life, it's with your family, it's with your friends, it's when, it changes everything.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is the first, and Jeff Booth says this a lot, it's the first global free market. Because nobody can stop you, it means you can have free value exchange the world over without borders, without gatekeepers. And to think about the amount of latent productivity that we have all around the world, even in Canada, if people were able to freely trade with each other, without interference, the amount of productivity gains we will see and the quality of life uplift for everybody on the planet, it's like a new renaissance.
Yeah, all prices would collapse forever.
Yeah, in a free market, perfect money, prices go down forever and quality goes up forever.
Abundance goes up forever. Yeah. I totally agree.
When you frame it like that, of course, the internet sounds like a toy.
Yeah.
And, clearly it's not, but it just shows you the degree to which the US is led in the internet age. In large part because of the general approach of America, but the fact that they did embrace it early on as well, and instead of trying to fight it, they tried to fight it and then gave up very quickly when they realized they were going to lose, and so they embraced it instead. And then look what happened. The same is going to happen with Bitcoin. We're just very early in the journey. It's like Bitcoin is like the internet in the 90s. It's like you can get up and you can use it and things, but you have to do a lot of work first. You have to understand it. It's getting more user friendly in areas, but it's still tricky. Like you wouldn't trust your grandma doing it. Like whereas now your grandma has an iPad and she watches YouTube. In the evenings. Like it will get to that level of UX and ease and familiarity, but it wasn't there in the 90s.
No.
But this is ultimately where we're going.
So, Joe, can the politicians save us? Will they save us? Is there any political party, any political leader that can do anything to change the broken system we're in? Or does it all come down to Bitcoin? Like I held out hope for a long time. And, in different political leaders or ideas or possibly parties, but not really parties. I've never been beholden to a single party. But that somebody could come in and change things because you see all the problems. And before I had attributed it to Bitcoin, I thought, okay, well, somebody can solve this by this policy, by changing this, so on. What are your thoughts on that?
Individuals can make differences, but politicians are only ever temporary. Anyway, but if you think about what happens as Bitcoin eats its way through the population, is that the politicians start to change as well. Right. We're at that tipping point now where Bitcoin becomes an issue in elections.
Yeah.
99% of politicians don't get it yet. The 1% that do get elected. Because they realize by embracing it wins you votes, by fighting it doesn't win you any votes. You know, I'm a one-issue voter, you're close to, or if not a one-issue voter.
Yeah.
No one's a one-issue voter being anti-Bitcoin. Right? So,
true.
So what's the natural stance that politicians will take in Bitcoin? They'll be super pro-Bitcoin. They will. Right? And so the first ones that do that will see the outsized benefit. Ultimately, it will become the default for everybody because you don't win. There's nothing to be gained by taking the other side of that. And then when you start doing that, you start thinking about Bitcoin. And then you own a bit of Bitcoin. And then you start thinking like a Bitcoiner. And then you realize what the problems are and we need to change them. And so Bitcoin is just a virus. It's a positive virus that's going to just infect the world. And when you do that, people get infected and people change and politics changes. You know, in a world where everyone's orange pilled, we don't have big governments anymore. No. It's a nonsensical idea. Like, we know this, you and I know this. It will resolve itself. We just need to educate everybody.
It feels natural that governance would decentralize as well to localities, and would be to your benefit as opposed to the government's benefit, because they can no longer abuse the money printer and just fend for themselves at the expense of their citizens. You take that power away from them, right? They now have to serve you. What do you think that world looks like? Like, what happens to nation states?
Good question. The government should just be a service provider in the same way as everything else. It should be able to change a service provider.
Yeah,
you know, it's the move to the sovereign individual. If everyone can carry Bitcoin in their head and the government can't reach it, the government needs to become fitter. It's a competition between governments.
You go where you're treated best.
Yeah, attract capital.
Yes.
You know, it's clearly that sounds probably fanciful, but I think ultimately it's where it gets to, because if you try and fight it, you lose. When you no longer have the moose shekel walled garden, your power is removed.
I love that you've been calling it moose shekels the whole podcast, by the way.
Yeah, I hope I haven't offended anybody by doing that.
No, it makes, if anything, it demeans our currency even more, these fake moose shekels that they make up.
Yeah,
I love it.
They're all just make-believe. They are just make-believe.
They're make-believe. It's a fiction. Joe, it's a beautiful thing, man. It's really beautiful. Like, I am so hopeful and optimistic for the future because of Bitcoin. It's genuinely life-changing and life-saving, I would say, knowing that there's this escape hatch. How did you fall down this rabbit hole? Maybe we can end with that. Like, what's your story? What's your background? What's your story?
My background, I studied physics at Oxford and went to Goldman Sachs. I was there for about 5 years as an equity derivatives trader, and then spent another 5 years at Morgan Stanley and UBS doing the same thing.
Wow. Okay.
And then left those to move into sports. So I created a quant engineering sports business where we would model the probabilities of things happening in sports events. And
quantum engineering, sports,
quantitative engineering.
Quantitative.
Yeah. So writing mathematical models to calculate the probabilities of things happening in sports events, and then bolting that onto real-time engineering and building automated trading systems and supplying bookmakers with new products and pricing for their customers. And that we then acquired, and then until about 12 months ago, I was with that business, acquiring business, helping them grow to be a global player today. But then in 2020, during that period, I found Bitcoin. And so the last 5 years has just been going further and further down with Bitcoin. And, I took the opportunity last year to take a step out of that business, because the only thing worth focusing on is Bitcoin. It's the only thing that matters, because if we fix the money, we'll fix the world. And so anything else, working on anything else, is just downstream. It's just a symptom. It's not the problem. So we need to fix the problem. And fixing that problem means educating people, helping them understand what the problem is, and getting them to the starting line with Bitcoin. And so, I hope, after having sat through my various monologues on this podcast, people will be interested to go and watch the video. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. I just want people to be motivated to learn about Bitcoin, even if they ultimately decide it's not for them for whatever reason. I don't want people to buy Bitcoin. I just want people to learn about it.
Yeah.
So I'm confident they learn about it and they apply critical thinking. They're just going to go further and further down that rabbit hole as you and I both have.
And that's the thing. Like, you have to think for yourself. You have to think this through yourself, because you will inevitably come to the same logical conclusions if you just think about it. But you can't be told what to think. Like, you have to think this through yourself, because that's, for me, that was the only way the conviction landed, is when I really took the time to educate myself more, sure, but also as I was doing that education, to think it through and try to poke holes in it and try to think things through to their logical second order, third order, fourth order effects. And you just come to this conclusion over time that it's like, holy smokes, all roads lead to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And you sound like a crazy person to somebody that just thinks it's this magic internet coin, Mario coin, fart coin that you're buying. And oh my God, it is so much bigger.
But you probably thought that in the past. I certainly thought that in the past. But it's the great thing about Bitcoin is it's an ego test first. You can either, even if you think it's nonsense, just spend a little bit of time reading about it. If your ego is that big to think that there are thousands of smart people around the world who have spent tens of thousands of hours looking at this thing and have concluded that it's going to change the world. If your ego is so big to think, well, I know better. I've done no research on it, but I know better. They're all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Then fine. Right? Most people's egos are not that big. Most people will say, okay, well, there might be something in this. If all these people have spent time on it, and these are not stupid people.
No.
And there's only ever growing numbers of them. Maybe there's something here. Maybe I should spend half an hour watching a video, or a couple of hours reading this book, right? Just in case, right? And then you realize that everything you think is wrong. All the things that that you've been told, all that structure that you have that you've been ingrained with, is incorrect. It's very hard to come out the other side of that process with a big ego.
Yeah, it's very humbling.
It's very humbling, yeah, because it's like, geez, I was wrong. I spent the first 37 years of my life, thinking the wrong thing. And it's so obvious now. It's just so obvious.
Yeah. You've taken off the fiat glasses and you're seeing the world for the first time. You're just seeing reality, natural reality for the first time. And it literally is like you're escaping the Matrix because you realize you've been lied to your whole life. Your entire construct was a lie. It didn't make sense. It didn't match up with reality. Like what's being told through your screen, what you're being programmed does not compute with how reality actually works. And it's a very painful process, I would actually say, is painful and shocking process. But that's where the orange pill reference came from, because the Matrix is just the best reference, because once you take that pill, it's literally like you're Neo and you're waking up and you're unplugging those wires out of the back of your skull and you're seeing the world for what it is and the lies that have been told, which is a very dark process, I would say. But on the other side, you come out with that optimism.
You do. And it's not like you have to believe anything. It's critical thinking. It's evidence-based critical thinking. It's not like there's a dusty old book. Read this dusty old book and believe what's written in it, right? There's no faith required here. And I'm not speaking negatively about any religions or anything like this, but it's critical thinking, evidence-based logic that thousands of people around the world have been through that process and have arrived at the same conclusion, right? And so it's on you to start that journey, because it's an inevitable outcome, because you think through each of the steps yourself. Because it's very rare in life that we go back and question first principles on anything. We sort of take it for granted, because those first principles are sort of implicit in something at a higher level. And then you interact and you're told repeatedly this thing at the higher level. Unless you go back and question how you got to that, then you never can really assess whether it's accurate or not. You are taking that thing on faith, unless you break it down. You're
the fish in water who never questioned what water is.
Yeah.
Right. And it reminds me of that quote as well. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And you can swap Bitcoin in for reality. You can ignore Bitcoin, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that's a great quote, and I think that's from Atlas Shrugged. Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. By
Ayn Rand, I believe.
Amazing book. Yeah.
Joe, you laid it out so beautiful. It's I don't know. It's just such a hopeful, optimistic thing. I didn't understand it until I joined with Rockstar back in 2019. I was totally brainwashed. I had no idea how anything worked when it came to money, the economy, anything. And it was through real estate that it began introducing me to some of these concepts, which, allowed me to put one foot into Bitcoin, already understanding some of the problems. But as I've gone further down the journey, I wish I had your video right from the beginning, because it would have got me there sooner. So thank you, Joe, for making that video. And I sincerely mean that.
Oh, well, thank you. There's nothing new in that video if you're a Bitcoiner. Like, there's no new content. There's nothing. You're not walking away from that thinking, I didn't know that. But it's the way that it's constructed, hopefully, means it's just much more accessible for everybody. It's the first 100 hours of reading Bitcoin in 30 minutes.
Yes,
right?
you've sped it up.
Having watched that, you then have this skeletal mental framework for when you sort of know enough or have a sense of enough of things to then, when you read something, you sort of pop that on the skeleton, and you sort of build out the full picture in your mind, rather than it, hitting the first Bitcoin book, not knowing anything, or not knowing why, not knowing any basic structure, and then like feeling out the elephant and being like, okay, well, this is not, it's a trunk, it's a snake, it's a, something like this. Not knowing what it is, it helps you to build it out. And I wish I'd had it 5 years earlier, but this is why I'm glad it's a good contribution to the ecosystem. And please watch it if you haven't seen it, and if you have seen it, please share it with other people that you care about.
So we will link it in the show notes. You can click it and watch it on YouTube. But Joe, where can people find it? Can you make it easy for them?
Yes, so you find me on X at Satmojoe, SATMOJOE. The video has the same website handle and YouTube channel, and that's Sats versus Fiat. So SATS, so Sats being short for Satoshis, VS versus, and then Fiat, FIAT. So Sats versus Fiat. And it's the same across all three. So you can find it in all three places.
So satsversusfiat.com, that's the social handles for YouTube, for X. Yeah. Well, and then you can personally follow Joe, which I recommend as well, at Satmojoe.
Satmojoe. And I would say, Anthony, as well, given you're in Canada and it's bilingual, we have the video in almost 40 native languages now on subtitles, and on the website satsversusfiat.com we have all the materials available, so the slide deck, the speaker notes, and the presentation in English and 20 other languages, all translated by native speaking Bitcoiners all around the world, all volunteers. And now we're remaking the video in every language.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
We're going to have the video, and these will be out in the next week or two. So please watch the video now. Okay. And if you're a French native speaker, watch it again in a couple of weeks. There will be, I will be there in the video, but I will be dubbed in French, and all the slides will be in French in the video. Cool. So we can try and make it so that everyone in the world can watch this video and get to the starting line.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks for taking the time today. I really, really appreciate it, and really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, you just summarized it. It's so beautiful. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed the chat, Anthony, and thank you to those at home listening.